My name is Elena. I'm 28 years old, and that night I stopped being their daughter and became their reckoning. I stood in the center of my parents' sunken living room, barefoot on imported limestone tiles, still cool from the afternoon rain outside, my right ankle wrapped in gauze already stained crimson, throbbing with every heartbeat like a second pulse beneath my skin. In my trembling hand, a $4,500 hospital bill, the precise cost of reattaching torn ligaments before permanent damage set in. The doctor had been clear, surgery within 10 days, or I'd walk with a limp for the rest of my life. Across the room, the air hung thick with vanilla-scented candles and unspoken judgment. My father, Richard, didn't look up. He was hunched over his latest obsession, a gleaming scale model of a 72-foot yacht, complete with miniature teak decks and brass fittings, worth more than my car, my rent, and my medical debt combined. "We already put the deposit on the boat," he said, polishing a tiny porthole with a microfiber cloth so soft it probably cost more than my shoes. 25 grand, non-refundable. His voice carried the same tone he used when discussing stock options, dispassionate, final. My mother, Diane, lay sprawled on the cream linen sofa, one manicured hand holding a glossy lifestyle magazine, the other cradling a bone china teacup. Without glancing up, she sighed. "You're an adult, honey. You made the choice to drive that death trap. Maybe limping for a few months will teach you to be more careful with your finances." From the corner armchair, my sister Lila looked up from her phone and smirked. "Just sell your laptop. It's not like your little freelance gigs are paying for anything real. Honestly, Elena, stop acting like you're the only one with problems." I looked at them, at the curated art on the walls, the designer furniture, the $25,000 toy boat, gleaming under recessed lighting, and then down at my swollen, bloodied ankle. I didn't scream, I didn't beg, I simply gripped the edge of the marble console, pushed myself upright through blinding pain, and walked out on broken bones, each step echoing in the silence they offered me, like a tomb sealing shut. I knew, even then, exactly what I had to do next. To understand why I left without a word, you have to understand the ledger my family kept, not in ink, but in glances, conditions, and withheld affection. Love wasn't given freely. It was invested, monitored, and withdrawn if returns weren't met. 2 years ago, Lila launched a luxury organic skincare line called Lumiere Botanics. She blew through $80,000 in 6 months, mostly on influencer retreats in Tulum and custom packaging that looked expensive but leaked serum. When it collapsed, my father wrote her a $50,000 check the same afternoon. No contract, no repayment plan. Just a pat on the back and, "Protect your credit score, sweetheart. Reputation is everything." Meanwhile, when I was 22 and needed $2,000 to fix my transmission so I could get to my first engineering job at a robotics startup, they made me sign a notarized promissory note at 5% interest. I ate instant noodles for 6 months, walked 3 miles each way to save gas, and paid them back 2 weeks early, just to prove I was responsible, reliable, worthy. I thought if I showed them integrity, they'd finally see me as more than the backup child, the quiet one who didn't demand attention. I was naive. Now, sitting on the floor of my 400-square-foot studio apartment, back pressed against cold drywall, eviction notice taped beside the microwave, I finally saw the truth. They weren't broke. They'd just chosen a fiberglass hull over their daughter's ability to walk. In their eyes, I wasn't family. I was a bad asset. a write-off, a liability they could discard once I stopped performing gratitude. The silence that followed me out the door wasn't awkward. It was deliberate. It was the sound of people who'd rather watch their child bleed than risk scuffing the Persian rug. A soft knock startled me from the spiral of despair. I froze. Was it the landlord? Had he come to change the locks already? Heart hammering against my ribs, I hopped on one leg to the peephole. Relief flooded me, sharp and sweet. It was Matteo, my younger brother, still in grease-stained coveralls, eyes bloodshot from double shifts at the auto shop, smelling of motor oil, stale coffee, and exhaustion. He didn't say a word, just stepped inside, took one look at my purpled ankle propped on a stack of textbooks, and winced. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a wad of cash, mostly 10s and 20s, crumpled and damp, smelling of the garage floor. "It's 500, he said, voice rough like gravel. "Sold my full socket set to the new guy, brand new snap-ons. I know it's not 4,000, Elena, but it's literally everything I have right now." I stared at the dirty bills in his calloused hands, hands that fixed engines, rebuilt transmissions, worked 12-hour days just to keep his own lights on. My parents owned property, stocks, art, but wouldn't spare a dime. My brother, who lived paycheck to paycheck in a converted garage behind a laundromat, sold the tools he needed to eat just to give me hope. "Keep it," I whispered, tears burning but not falling. "You need your tools to work." "Take it," he insisted, shoving the money into my palm. "Please, I can't watch you lose your leg because they're monsters." I took the money, not because it would pay for surgery, it wouldn't even cover anesthesia, but because I needed to remember this moment forever. I needed to remember that while the people in the mansion let me bleed, the brother with nothing gave me everything. That night, after Matteo left, I didn't sleep. I made a decision. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. The next morning, I walked into a predatory lender's office on crutches, looking like I hadn't slept in weeks, which I hadn't. I signed a loan with an interest rate that should have been illegal, secured against future income I wasn't sure I'd earn, but I didn't care. I was going to walk again. And once I was back on my feet, I was going to make sure my parents paid for every single step. 2 weeks after surgery, I sat on my thrift store couch, leg in a cast propped on a stack of old engineering journals, staring at a bowl of lukewarm ramen. Physically, I was healing. Financially, I was bleeding out. The first payment on the loan was due in 3 days. My bank account held exactly $42. I was calculating whether I could sell plasma while still on painkillers when my fingers brushed against something in the pocket of my jeans. Crumpled, forgotten. The lottery ticket. I'd bought it on impulse at the gas station while picking up my prescription, a $2 tax on desperation. I smoothed it against the coffee table, opened the state lottery app, and typed in the numbers slowly. 12, 18, 4, 33, 49, Powerball 7. The screen blinked, then flashed, winner, $12,000. I didn't scream. I didn't jump up. I just sat there in the absolute terrifying silence of my apartment, listening to the refrigerator hum. In the movies, people pop champagne. In real life, when you hand a starving person a feast, they don't celebrate, they get suspicious. A cold clarity washed over me. If my parents knew about this, they'd suddenly remember how much they loved their independent daughter. Lila would need a business partner. I didn't cash the ticket immediately. Instead, I hired a lawyer, not a strip mall attorney, but a corporate shark in a glass tower downtown who charged $800 an hour. I walked into his office on crutches, hair unwashed, wearing a faded hoodie, and placed the ticket on his polished mahogany desk. "I want two things," I told him, voice steady despite my shaking hands. "Put this money into a blind trust so no one knows my name, and run a full forensic financial investigation into Richard and Diane Hartwell." 3 days later, I was back in his office. He slid a thick dossier across the desk. I opened it, and the myth of my parents' wealth dissolved into ink and paper. They weren't rich, they were drowning. The Mercer Island mansion. Mortgaged to the hilt, 3 months behind on payments, foreclosure notices hidden in a false bottom drawer in Richard's study. The $25,000 boat deposit charged to a maxed-out credit card with 22% APR. Lila's successful skincare business, bleeding cash, surviving only because Richard was illegally siphoning equity from the house to cover her payroll and Instagram ad buys. I stared at the red numbers, the hidden transfers, the shell accounts. They had refused me $4,500 to save my leg while hemorrhaging $500,000 to save their egos. They weren't just cruel, they were frauds, playing a game of chicken with bankruptcy, and they were losing. "What do you want to do?" my lawyer asked. "We can structure your assets to protect you from their creditors." "No," I said, closing the file with a soft thud. "I don't want to run from their debt. I want to own it." I instructed him to form a shell company. We called it Vesper Holdings. With my new capital, I approached the bank that held my parents' distressed mortgage and Lila's delinquent business loans. Banks hate bad debt. They'll sell it for pennies on the dollar just to get it off their books. I bought it all. Within 48 hours, I went from being the rejected daughter to the owner of their entire existence. I held the deed to their house. I held the lien on Lila's boutique. They were living on my property, spending money they owed me. I signed the final paperwork with a steady hand. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was the predator in the water, and they didn't even know I was swimming beneath them. I knew my parents better than they knew themselves. If I approached them as a creditor demanding payment, they'd play the victims, cry to their country club friends, start a GoFundMe titled "Family Targeted by Ruthless Corporation," and paint me as the villain. But if I approached them as an admirer offering a golden parachute, they'd leap without checking if the chute was attached. So I hired a lawyer named Mr. Thorne to be the face of Vesper Holdings. He was everything my parents worshipped. Older, British accent smooth as aged whiskey, wearing a suit that cost more than Mateo's annual salary. He met them at a private lunch club downtown, neutral ground that smelled of old money and exclusion. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. I had an audio feed, listening from my car parked a block away. "Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell," Thorne's voice was velvet over steel. "Vesper Holdings specializes in distressed assets with high potential. We see the value in your property, and frankly, we see the value in you." I heard the clink of silverware. My father cleared his throat, that pompous sound he made when he felt important. "Well, we've certainly put a lot of equity into the estate. It's good to see a firm that appreciates quality." "Precisely," Thorne continued. "That's why we're offering a sale-leaseback agreement. We purchase the property and the business debt immediately. You clear your record. No foreclosure, no public embarrassment. You stay in the home as tenants for a nominal fee. Plus, as a signing bonus to help with operational liquidity, We're issuing a corporate credit card with a $50,000 limit. Silence. Then my mother's voice, breathless. 50,000? And we stay in the house? It's a standard retention package for our VIP clients, Thorne lied effortlessly. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. This was the moment. The document he slid across the table was 50 pages long. Buried on page 39 was Clause 39C. It was a legal guillotine. It stated that as tenants, any violation of the lease terms, including late payment by even 1 hour or unauthorized commercial use of the property, resulted in immediate, non-judicial eviction. No grace period, no court hearings. Instant termination. A rational person would ask, "What's the catch?" A scared person would read every word. But my parents weren't rational or scared. They were narcissists. There is a specific delusion that comes with being a narcissist, the absolute, unshakable belief that the universe owes you a favor. They didn't see a predatory contract. They saw validation. Of course, a hedge fund wanted to bail them out. Of course, they deserved a $50,000 spending limit. They viewed luck not as random, but as a character trait. They believed they were immune to consequences because, in their version of the story, they were the heroes. Arrogance isn't just a flaw, it's a blindfold. They didn't read the contract because they couldn't conceive of a world where someone was smart enough to trick them. "Where do we sign?" Richard asked. I heard the scratch of the pen. It was the sound of a lock clicking shut. "Excellent," Thorne said. "Welcome to the Vesper family." As they laughed and ordered a second bottle of wine on their new tab, I took my headphones off. They thought they'd cheated the system. They thought they'd found a loophole to keep their lifestyle without paying the price. They didn't realize the VIP package was just the last meal before the execution. Thanksgiving at the Hartwell household was never just a dinner. It was a stage play designed to showcase how perfect their lives were. But this year, fueled by the Vesper Holdings credit line, it was a coronation. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, picking at my stuffing, the room suffocatingly warm, filled with the scent of roasted turkey, expensive perfume, and performative joy. Lila was holding court, waving a glass of vintage Bordeaux paid for unknowingly by me. She was wearing a new diamond tennis bracelet that glittered under the crystal chandelier like ice. "It's just so refreshing to finally work with partners who understand vision," she gushed, gesturing vaguely with her wine glass. "Vesper isn't like those stuffy banks. They get it. They know you have to spend money to make money." My father nodded solemnly, slicing the turkey with ceremonial gravity that made me want to laugh. "Exactly. It takes a certain caliber of person to attract that kind of investment." They saw the potential in this family. Then he paused, the carving knife suspended in the air, and looked down the table at me. His eyes were heavy with pity. "You should take notes, Elena. Look at your sister. She knows how to leverage capital. She's a builder. You're still working for wages, playing small ball while the adults are in the big leagues." "Maybe Vesper just likes risky bets," I said quietly, taking a sip of water. My mother sneered. "Don't be jealous. At least someone here is securing our legacy." They were eating food I paid for in a house owned by my company, wearing clothes charged to my credit line. They didn't see it yet, but they were feasting on their own financial corpse. I no longer felt insulted, only detached, like a scientist watching lab rats devour poisoned bait, unaware the sugar was laced with truth. 3 weeks later, the bill came due. On the night their lease payment to Vesper Holdings was due, I quietly switched the payment gateway to maintenance mode. Richard tried to pay online at 11:47 p.m. The system rejected it. He didn't call customer service, didn't email, didn't document anything. He assumed the rules didn't apply to him. At midnight, the system logged the payment as missed. Automatically, Clause 39C triggered. Immediate lease termination, eviction. The house was mine. So were the loans. The next morning, I summoned them to a compliance review at Vesper's downtown offices. They arrived 20 minutes late, furious, demanding to see Mr. Thorne. I turned slowly in my executive chair, sunlight glinting off the glass conference table. "You'll deal with the chairman," I said. Richard laughed until I told him the truth. "I am Vesper Holdings, I own your debt, and you are past the eviction deadline." Slide by slide, I showed them everything. How cheaply I'd bought their bad debt, how they'd squandered operating capital on Caribbean cruises and limited edition handbags, how they'd signed the clause they never bothered to read. "You didn't trick us," my mother whispered, face pale. "No," I said calmly. "You tricked yourselves." Richard lunged at me in rage. 2 security officers restrained him instantly. "You own nothing," I said, voice steady as stone. "You have 1 hour to vacate before the locks change." As they were dragged out, Richard spat one last threat, boasting about hidden Cayman Islands accounts. I pulled out a single document from my folder, IRS Form 211, the whistleblower claim for offshore tax evasion. "Already filed," I said, 12 weeks ago. Moments later, IRS criminal investigation agents entered the lobby. Richard and Lila were arrested on the spot for tax evasion and wire fraud. The government would seize the offshore money. My whistleblower reward would be $600,000. I walked outside into the cold November air. It didn't smell like money. It smelled like freedom, like rain on pavement, like possibility. I pulled out my phone and dialed the only number that mattered. "Pack your bags, Mateo," I said, voice thick with emotion I finally allowed myself to feel. "I just bought the auto shop. We're starting over." Never underestimate the quiet one in the room. They're not weak, they're patient, they're watching, learning, waiting for the moment when silence becomes strategy and strategy becomes justice. Have you ever been discarded by the people who swore they'd protect you? Drop a comment below and tell me your story. You're not alone. Because real family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by who shows up when you're bleeding. And if yours doesn't, then you build your own, brick by brick, truth by truth. With your integrity intact, your brother by your side and your feet, finally walking straight into the future you earned.